All right. Once again, good morning. And I would like to warmly welcome our esteemed panelists for the day and online participants to the second day of this year's Religion and Ecology Summit, hosted by the Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where we are also celebrating International Earth Day. My name is Chantal Noah Forbes, and I serve as adjunct faculty in the Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion program at CIS, whose university building on Mission Street in San Francisco occupies traditional unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. I join you today from the traditional lands and waterways of the Monacan Indian Nation in Charlottesville, Virginia. We have an exciting lineup for our participants and community today. Our program will begin with the summit's keynote talk by Swati Thiyagarajan. We will then take a quick 5-minute break to allow our next panel to set up, which is titled Radical Remembering, a Gathering of Three Bodies of Water. Following the panel, we will close our morning session with a multimedia poetry presentation with Sarah Heddy from CIS. Our fourth and final panel of the summit, titled Rivers and the Rights of Nature, will then be held between 1 and 3 p.m. Pacific time. Our theme for this year's summit is Sacred Waters of the World, Pathways to Ecological Reverence, Renewal, and Responsibility on a Changing Planet. And our keynote speaker embodies this theme intellectually, spiritually, and somatically through the environmental ethics and relational practices that she demonstrates daily in her work with human and more than human communities, both in the country of her birth, India, and in her adopted country of South Africa. Swati is an international award-winning conservation and wildlife journalist. She was the environment editor at NDTV and consulting editor for their special projects. Her work has taken her across the planet, and her show, Born Wild, a first of its kind, is a long-format conservation show on news channels, which was the first all-women's team in the field of wildlife television in the world. She is the author of the book, Born Wild, Journeys into the Wild Hearts of India and Africa, and co-directed the film The Animal Communicator, available online in the United States. Today, Swati works as a conservation storyteller at the Sea Change Project, a non-for-profit ocean conservation organization based in Cape Town, South Africa, focused on the long-term protection of the Great African Sea Forest. The Sea Change Project is comprised of a community of scientists, storytellers, journalists, and filmmakers who are dedicated to the wild and specifically the Great African Sea Forest. This community advocates for the healing of our planet by connecting people to nature through science-based immersive storytelling. As part of this work, Swati was the associate producer on the Academy Award-winning film My Octopus Teacher. She is also an advisory board member of SOSA, which stands for Seckenberg Ocean Species Alliance, at the Seckenberg Biodiversity Institute in Frankfurt. Swati believes biodiversity conservation and regeneration are the main solutions to restoring planetary health. Swati and the Sea Change Project team are currently out in the field in the Seychelles, surrounded by the Indian Ocean with limited access to the internet. And for this reason, Swati has pre-recorded her keynote, which will be followed by a live Q&A with Swati. In a moment, we'll begin playing Swati's recording, which concludes with 3 short video clips. As we move through the recording, please feel free to post your questions and comments in the Q&A function for us to address with Swati afterwards. So I'd like to welcome Swati to the screen.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to do this keynote. Water and I have had a strange and complicated and wondrous relationship all my life. Before I get into that, I would like for all of us to close our eyes and take a few breaths. Focus on your breath coming in through your nostrils, filling your lungs, oxygenating your body, and cycling out through your nostrils again as carbon dioxide. Now, as you count your breaths, take your first breath in and thank the trees and the plants on land for that fresh breath of oxygen. Now, when you take your second breath in, thank the oceans. Every second breath every human being on this planet takes, no matter where they are, comes from the ocean, because the ocean produces close to 70% of our oxygen. For this, we can thank the phytoplankton in the ocean, that small green algae, and other algae like kelp. You can thank them for that life-giving inhale of oxygen. The lungs of the planet, therefore, are not the Amazon, but it is the oceans. And life as we know it, all life as we know it, depends on water. As Dr. Sylvia Earle, the famous marine biologist, once said, without blue, there is no green. Is there a culture, a tradition, a lineage, a community, a group of people who don't come from a reverence for water? I have a small prayer from my culture, Hinduism. Apohista mayo bhuvastha na urje dadatana mahe ranaya chakshasahe. It means, O water, because of your presence, the atmosphere is so refreshing and it imparts us with vigor and strength. We revere you who is great and who gladdens us with your pure essence. Mythology in Hinduism also sees the oceans as the realms of the gods, and humans are prohibited from entering it. In my adopted country in South Africa, it is believed that the oceans are a resting place for ancestors, and one needs to perform rituals and prayers and have deep respect before they can either go into the water or extract from it. Coming back to my relationship with water, it started as one of fear. When I was a child, I had a pretty bad near-drowning incident, and this made me so scared of water that I never learned to swim, nor did I ever approach it for a long time. So I reached adulthood without learning that very important skill of swimming. I loved being on the beach. I loved watching the dance of waves, but I was very frustrated that this fear held me back from ever enjoying the ocean. And then, in some great cosmic irony, I met a partner in 2006, Craig Foster, who pretty much lives in the water. I think he only visits land from time to time. After I moved to Cape Town, I was surrounded by people who lived in the water, amphibious souls, who would plead and entreat with me to join them in the water, and I would find that I just couldn't most of the time. They would come back with photographs and footage of what they had seen, incredible photographs and footage, and this would fill me with great FOMO, and I would feel so frustrated with myself that I couldn't go in the water and experience what they were experiencing. I had spent the previous decades working as an environment journalist and spent nearly all of my time in remote natural spaces reporting and telling stories about our wondrous terrestrial biodiversity and challenges of conservation. I had never had a happier place than being out in nature, from when I was a child and taken out for my first walk in the woods. And it always was a source of great despair and confusion when I just couldn't access the oceans or feel about the oceans the same way that I felt about nature on land. With a lot of coaxing, I would occasionally go in the water at low tide, in places where I could stand if I panicked. I would have a wetsuit on. I would have I would be wearing a life jacket, and the water would have to be very calm, very shallow. The kelp certainly helped, as kelp types act like flotation devices, especially at low tide. You could literally hold on to them or just lie on top of them like they were like this floating rafts. The water was also freezing, and my Indian skin was used to warm tropical climates. And in summer, when it's 20 degrees here in the water, everybody finds it warm, and even that was too cold for me. So perhaps considering this thing with the cold water, I was with Craig, who persuaded me to enter the shallows clad in a wetsuit and life jacket. But unfortunately, my first foray was into very cold water. The temperature was 51 degrees Fahrenheit or 11 degrees Celsius. I was in a wetsuit and a life jacket and a hoodie, and the resulting brain freeze and numb hands I thought would last a lifetime. So in hindsight, perhaps not the best time to have made my first sort of entry into the water, except for something magical. In the shallows, while trying to stay afloat and clinging to Craig and trying not to succumb to a full-blown panic attack, a dark, sleek shape swam under me. This shape was followed by two more, and they circled back. In that moment, I forgot to be scared, I forgot to hold on to Craig, and forgot that I was scared of water. And for the first time, I noticed the shafts of light coming through the kelp fronds and illuminating this grey, beautiful shape. It was 3 gully sharks. These were the very first sharks I saw. At 2 meters long with grey bodies with spots on them, these are beautiful, sleek sharks that love to swim through the shallows and cruise through the kelp. It was my first glimpse of them in the sea forest, and my first glimpse of the sea forest. These sharks are also very shy and spook at the slightest sort of harsh movement, and clearly my ungainly thrashing in the water freaked them out, and they very quickly vanished. And the minute they left, all the cold, the fear, the water, all of it rushed back into my head, and I panicked, and I got out of the water nearly as fast as the sharks had vanished. But unknown to me, a spark had been lit. After that, the few times I would go in the water, in the shallows, still in my wetsuit and life jacket, and as long as the persuasion and the entreaties and the pleading were enticing enough to get me into the water, I would always see gully sharks. And then, all those times, instead of dashing away like they did that first time, they would actually slightly swim up to where I was, kind of give me a pass by, almost like they were looking at me. It wasn't very far for them to swim up because this was in low tide and shallow, so it was not at all that high for them to come to the surface where I was. In those moments, every single time, my fear would just vanish and I would forget I was scared of the water, and I would just be filled with a sense of wonder. Imagine some shark ancestor was actually older than trees. They're older than the rings of Saturn. Rings of Saturn are only about 100 million years old. Sharks, nearly 400 million years old. And right now, the oldest living creature on Earth that's been recorded is the Greenland shark, 350 years old. I mean, if that's not a miracle, what is? And each time I would feel a little bit more of that pull in the water. From when I was a child, I was obsessed with animals. It didn't matter what kind. They fascinated me and filled me with joy. A butterfly flashing through the bushes, a bat winging through at dusk, the iridescent scales of a snake, the high keening cry of a Brahmini kite as it swooped and dove in the water, in the waves of the ocean, the haunting call of a jackal. All of these sounds, all of these sights, being in the woods, this is where I had always found my joy, always found my wonder. And so there I was feeling a deep imposter syndrome, because how could I hope to be an advocate for the ocean if I couldn't access it in the way I needed to be an authentic voice for her stories? I had never in all my years as an environment journalist phoned a story in. I had always immersed myself in the landscapes. I had always immersed myself in the issues, seen the animal, been with the species before I ever wrote a story on it. And then something happened that changed everything for me. It was a winter day a few years ago, and I just joined Sea Change Project, an ocean conservation not-for-profit that was started by my husband, Craig Foster. We had just started working on my octopus teacher, and just watching the footage, I remember thinking to myself, I have to get over this fear and I have to learn to be in the water. At that time, we got a message, a call, saying that a dead whale had been spotted and the whale had died because it had entangled itself in octopus fishing traps, and that the city was sending out a retrieval team, and one of us was welcome to join them. I immediately rushed out with them. And it was a horrible sight. It was terrible to see this great, beautiful animal dead in the water, an air-breathing mammal that lives in the ocean, drowned because it couldn't come up for air when the ropes had entangled it. A few days later, we got a call about another dead whale. This time it was a juvenile humpback whale. The previous whale was a Brutus whale. And when I was on the boat taking photographs of this animal being dragged out of the water onto the slipway, I felt the deep irony of the fact that that slipway it was hoisted on used to be the site of an old whaling station where hundreds of southern right whales had been slaughtered along with several other whales. South Africa took the exemplary decision to halt whaling in 1979, but it felt like an echo of those times to see this. My articles went out in all of the major publications, and along with other groups who had protested, we managed to get the attention of the Environment Minister. She then decreed that all of these octopus fishing traps had to be pulled out of the water until they could be modified and certified as whale friendly. This felt like a huge win, and we did save a lot of whale lives that season. A few days after that order had come through, while I was bumbling in the shallows as usual, a juvenile humpback swam through the kelp forest in the shallows and came close enough for me to touch. A few days later, a southern right juvenile did the same. It's hard to describe what it feels like to see these massive animals in the water. Overwhelming does not begin to describe it, and I felt a shift in my being. I will not stretch incredulity by saying that they came specifically through as a sign, but I decided I would take it as a sign. I have certainly not seen them since, so it's not something that happens regularly. They probably came in to feed on something that was there, but I have not seen them since do that, and I've never experienced it again, so I certainly took that for a sign. I felt like the ocean was calling, that the sea forest was calling, and I had to answer. I believe absolutely that there is a deep and ancient sentience embedded in nature, what we at Sea Change think of as the forest mind when we are in the water in the great African sea forest. And that intelligence seemed to be opening up a portal for me to come through. In Hinduism, we believe that all beings, human and non-human, are imbued with the soul, the Atman, that we are all interconnected by this essence and are expressions of the greater universal consciousness. I don't know if I'd internalized this thought in a deep way, but on that day, it absolutely crystallized for me. For years during my time as a reporter across India, I had had really good fortune and spent time with our tribal people, and their worldview had so changed who I was as a person when I first started out. When I started out as a journalist, when I went into the wild, I only acknowledged it as a wild space if it was, pristine, as in no people there at all whatsoever, no human presence. And that changed to me understanding from the tribal point of view that people are so much a part of the wild, that we are the human animal, and that we have a right to be in these wild spaces as much as any non-human animal does. And this was a profound shift in how I viewed nature after that. Our tribal people and other indigenous groups over the years also taught me how deeply important revering nature is. When we revere nature, we see her as a whole living being. To some people, she is Gaia. To others, she's a mother. To some, an intrinsic part of their being. The reverence allowed us to keep our presence minimal and live in reciprocity, in true design as the human animal. Even as times changed, it allowed us to not want to destroy that which we instinctively understood as our home. When reverence drops away, then we suddenly see the world, as the First Nations elder so clearly put it. We stop seeing her as the source of all life to simply a resource from which we can extract. Everything then boils down to, we will save that which we will deem useful and remove that which is not. Even our language and all of our conservation language became transactional. So basically, what did we start doing? It's like, save a tree because it gives you oxygen. Save the oceans as our livelihoods depend upon it. Save a river because it gives you fresh water. Clear forests for land, even if animals lose their home, because, we need some project to go up there. And first, it was like, it's only animals, and that very quickly translated into, oh, we're just moving a few people. So let's displace the communities who've lived there for generations because people in the city need energy when we have to dig for coal somewhere. When we have no respect for an old growth tree that is 200 years old and has withstood time and storms and changes, and we just chop it down for charcoal or coal, how will we have any respect for each other? In the system of consumerism and infinite growth that we have created and touted as the path to all happiness, how did we not understand and incorporate the diamond water complex? Postulated by the economist Adam Smith, the conundrum exists in that while water is essential for all life on earth, a diamond is not. But pound for pound, a diamond is 10 times or more the price of water. So what does that mean? So we decided price had more value than intrinsic value. Basically, we live in a world where what we value is actually just a price, and what we don't treat with care holds real value. This then also led to the patriarchal notion that women's work doesn't hold value. A woman looking after her home, a family, the elderly, a community that work does not hold the same value as a person who can produce something that can be bought by someone else, a marketplace. Over a decade ago, I was up in the Himalayas in India in the state of Himachal Pradesh. I was there to do a story on fresh water and stress, and about the stress over the accessibility of this fresh water. The Bias River has a dam, and there are hydroelectrical power projects on it to get water and to get electricity to towns and cities, and even to a city as far as Delhi, hundreds of kilometers away from where this dam and this river is. And yet, there were local villages, barely a few miles away, that didn't even have pipes or taps in their homes where they could access the water. They still had to trek those mountainous paths to get to the river, to fill buckets and pots with water and carry it back all the way again to their homes. And of course, most of this work was done by women. And more horrifying, household after household, little girls were not going to school because they were helping their mother collect water. I mean, what a reason to not get an education simply because they had to go collect water. These homes didn't even have taps or pipes that brought them water. The villages had also moved away from being closer to the river as the dam and the hydel project had firstly flooded a lot of the land, so they were displaced, and then they were prone to flooding in the monsoon or during the winter because of climate vagaries, and so these villages had moved away. So now they were further from the river and had to walk further to get the water. Meanwhile, on my return to Delhi, I found rich homes throwing rain parties in the summer where outrageous amounts of water are brought in by water tankers and set up with artificial sprinklers, and it rains down on the party goers as they dance. It was a wake-up call to iniquity like no other, this utter lack of reverence or responsibility like no other. I mean, wasting all that water in Delhi's scorching summer. One group of people deemed not important enough, even though they live near the river, to even have a tap in their houses, and another group important enough that they can waste water in any which way that they wanted to. In my adopted home of South Africa, the legacy of apartheid removed swathes of people from their homes and banned them from accessing the beaches, cutting them off from centuries-old traditions, cultural beliefs, ways of life, severing a very sacred thread to the heart of their ancestors. Even today, these wounds are open with slow healing. After the encounter with the two whales, the shift within me, begun by the gully sharks, became profound, and I learned to work to turn my fear to wonder actively. And to do that, I went back to my deep place of reverence and joy and freedom. Because that is what nature immersion brings to us, a sense of belonging, a sense of freedom, and most importantly, a sense of kinship, not just with the humans around us, but with also our non-human kin. Finding this wonder and holding it, I believe, is the way forward in this complicated world that we have built, a world where iniquity and inequality and the suffering of our non-humans and fellow humans have reached new depths. These spaces, these feelings, this reverence needs a reclaiming. It needs for all of us to come together in story and share our experiences in nature. Today, I can be in that 11 degrees Celsius water without a wetsuit. I can swim and dive every day. My ocean tribe is growing, and I want the waters of my adopted country to become a rainbow ocean with everyone having access to it. Now it's not just the sharks and the whales and the rays and the other big animals that I encounter, but the little ones, cryptically hidden under rocks, sleeping in the crevices, feeding in the shadows and sheltering in the fronds of the kelp. The limpets, the anemones, the nudibranchs, the crabs, the whelks, the amphipods and the little shrimp, hundreds of thousands of others, and the wondrous sea squirt, with whom we share 80% of our DNA. Ruby red, bulbous, and often tucked out of sight, red bait is a type of sea squirt. In its adult life, it is sessile, fixed in place. Literally looks like a plant, but it's an animal. But it starts out life like a tadpole-like swimming creature. It even has an axis and a spinal cord. And it's only later that does it fix itself onto a rock or a substrate and then, become an adult. And when it does that, it loses that spinal cord. So these animals are filter feeders. That's how they survive. And when they were genome sequenced, it was found that we share 80% of our DNA with them. Once that door of connection and realization opens, there is no going back. How can we not realize how deeply we belong, how magic this is our home? And what makes it home is that all of us are here together. And just like any family, it is up to us to make it or break it. Things are challenging right now, but we are not without power. The first power we have is the power of choice. We can choose love first, always. We also have 3 other very powerful weapons. We have our wallets, our votes, and our voices. We can make the right choices, vote for people who care, and raise our voices for not just each other, but for all of our non-human kin. So I would like to end this keynote once more with breathing, and this time, close your eyes and give thanks to our common ancestors, the Sacrohytus, that ancient ancestor of the sea, from whence many strains of animal species came forth, slowly to walk on land, including us, where our tears and blood and sweat all still carry salt, where our bodies are still 70% water, where our life begins still in liquid enclosed in the womb. It is why at Sea Change Project our tagline is, remember you are wild, and why in our organization we are grounded in science, guided by indigenous wisdom and inspired by nature. For us, deep nature connection is at the heart of all the healing in the world, when after a long journey I too learned to free my amphibious soul.
They are fleeting ghosts in the mist forest, teasing us with fragments of their time. Then our brothers and sisters, let us swim beside them, and we feel filled up by their ancient presence. Sharks are older than trees by 100 million years. 200 million years older than dinosaurs. And they've survived 4 mass extinctions. They're travelers from the mists of deep time. Now they feel more like great-great-grandmothers, great-grandfathers, warming our hearts in the cold forest. Being with them is like looking in an old, faded mirror and seeing a reflection of what we once were, fully wild too. As a species, what we seem to have forgotten is that biodiversity, the sheer number of animals and plants on this planet, is our mother of all mothers. She is the source that drives everything we do. Every mouthful of food, every breath of air is coming from the complexity of nature that is making that oxygen. Over 60% from the ocean phytoplankton, the rest from land plants and trees. She is feeding all life on earth. She is the source of all sources, and she has been here for us Homo sapiens for 300,000 years. She's cared for us from our beginnings. She's woven into our ancestral memory. For 97% of our time as humans, we've been aware of her. Many of us have worshipped her. All have respected her. We've made connections and threads to her deep source, the essence of all life, the pulsing heart of Mother Nature. The land and the sea forests, as well as the moon, the sun, the cosmos, and gravity, are all part of this magnificent architecture of life, our shared life support system. And in this last 3% of our time on Earth, we've suddenly severed those extraordinary threads to the Great Mother. And we've somehow in the madness thought we could live independent of nature, forgetting that our bodies, our minds, our beings are nature itself. There's no separation. We were woven into that biological intelligence right from the beginning. We're a product of 14 billion years of this mother, of this birthing. We're literally stardust that's turned into these highly sophisticated primates. But we cannot divorce ourselves from the source. That will be our undoing and has been our undoing. Our vision at Sea Change is really to start to repair those threads back to the source and encourage and facilitate people's reconnection to nature, to the Great Mother, so that we can start to build back and reimagine the biodiversity for which this planet was designed. I kayaked out with my wife Swati to a granite boulder in the middle of the ocean. She spontaneously started to dance, mimicking the kelp forest and the water that swirled around us. I felt a deep love for her and for the great sea forest that feeds our mind every day. In her movements, I sensed the unity between human and water, an ancient pact that stretches back 5,000 generations on this African coast, a pact that early humans kept with the wild, and something we now realize is the most precious thing we will ever have. We bow down before the God of wild, before Mother Nature incarnate, completely at her mercy, and cradled from the first human murmur. She is the blood in our veins. She is our beating heart. She is our moving hands and arms. If we defile her, we defile our most sacred heritage. If we feed her, we feed our hominid soul.
So now I would like to welcome Swati to the screen. if her internet is stable enough. Welcome, Swati.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hopefully the internet will hold. If it doesn't, I'll turn the video off and try the audio.
Great. And before I open it up to the audience for questions, I'd like to ask perhaps if you can share where you are and what yourself and Sea Change are doing on your current field trip.
So we are in the Outer Amarantes on a research station island, and we work a lot with the Save Our Seas Foundation, and they have the Save Our Seas Foundation Taros Research Station here, and they do a lot of amazing work on sharks and rays and every other animal. And, so we come here from time to time to essentially help them with a couple of stories. And we do some storytelling from here. And it's also just one of those things where it's part of the sea change experience to also try and come to places that are maybe near pristine, that are biodiversity still intact, and it kind of gives you a sense of hope, and it gives you a sense of how precious places, so few that are left, that have this level of near pristine environment, which are protected. And it gives you this sense that it's not just crucial to have more of these places, that there is potential for many other places to become like this, to go back to being near pristine if enough policy is put in place in order for them to get protected. So that's part of, what we do here. But our primary work is still in the Great African Sea Forest in Cape Town. That's really where our main focus is. That's really where all of our storytelling and inspiration comes from. And that's really where our deep nature immersion work happens. So yeah, that's really it.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And speaking of the Great African Sea Forest, in your keynote, you talk of the ancient wisdom of the forest mind that is inherent in the ocean. And I was wondering if you could share more about this concept and how it guides you through your work.
So essentially, the forest mind concept came to us because of a few personal experiences, I would say, because obviously these things are not quantifiable in that empirical way that science has of quantifying it. It's more a feeling-based and experience-based sort of idea that we came up with. So essentially, often you'll find when you're immersed in nature, and I'm talking about making an actual connection, not just, going somewhere and looking at a pretty scenery or watching the sunset and then going back home. I mean, the daily immersion that we do, the time that we spend in the forest, the effort that you put in, and you will find that when you go past a certain barrier, and what I mean by that is you actually make it a daily practice. And no matter what is happening in that day, it could be a rainy day, it could be a cold day, it could be a stormy day, it could be so many factors could actually make it maybe uncomfortable maybe for you to be out that day, because already the water is cold and could just be a particularly more cold day. But when you go past that discomfort and you make this part of your practice, and this is where you approach nature, there's a kind of, I find, a window or a portal that really opens up, and you find that things that you were thinking of, this has happened over and over and over, and which is why I feel that, I feel very strongly there's this sentience. And in any ecosystem, it's not just the Great African Sea Forest. I think people who've been in any ecosystem long enough will tell you, you'll be actually thinking of a certain animal, or you'll be thinking of a certain experience, or you'll have a question in your head about something you'd seen on a previous dive or 10 dives before, and you're wondering, oh, why did I see that? Or why did this animal do this? Or how, what was that particular action that happened? And you will find that when you're focused on that and you're doing this practice, you'll enter the water and you'll literally see the animal you're thinking about, or the behavior that you've been questioning, or the answer to your question will come to you. And it's almost like there's this deep sentience that draws you into that way of being and attunes you to ask the question and then look for the answer, and then you actually find it. So there's this kind of a feedback loop. And I think that happens a lot on land as well, which is why you'll find places where communities have learned to coexist with the environment around them. You'll find far less conflict with big predatory animals. Like in India and places with leopards, for example, there are places where people and leopards die in conflict, and there are places where for generations people have lived in coexistence with leopards and not a single child has ever been harmed or taken by a leopard, and over generations they have no memory of an attack. Or same thing with elephants and tigers in India, and it's absolutely true of Africa as well. So you find that there is a certain feedback loop that happens between you and the environment that you're in, and I find that this sentience actually understands where you stand and how you approach it, and then the way it responds to you is pretty extraordinary. And as I said, obviously this is not a scientific, it's in no scientific framework, but this has just been my over 2 decades of experience of being in the wild. Yeah.
Thank you. And I have 2 community-based questions from our audience. But I also had a question about the Great African Sea Forest, right? What is the Great African Sea Forest? Where is it? So you and I are talking as if we're very familiar with this place, but perhaps you can contextualize for our audience.
So the Great African Sea Forest is the name that we've given to the kelp forest that runs, along the coast of Southern Africa. It runs roughly about 1,300 kilometers on the western coast, really. So it goes all the way up towards Namibia. And this stretch of kelp forest is what we have called the Great African Sea Forest. This is the only floating bamboo kelp forest in the world, the Ecologia maxima. And, I think South Africa is ranked, I think, number 3 in the world in marine endemism, which means animals that are found only in South Africa, nowhere else in the world. And part of that is because of the kelp forest, which is an incredibly biodiverse ecosystem. And I think people who live in places like California and in Australia and in other places who have kelp forests will at least understand what I'm saying when I say kelp forests. Kelp forests are essentially these extraordinary, it's an algae, actually. It's not so much a plant. It's a giant algae. And like the bull kelp in California, for example, is the largest kelp. It can grow to over 20, 30 meters high. It's also some of the fastest growing algae in the world. And it's almost like a forest underwater. So imagine the Amazon, but underwater. Imagine all the birds are fish, and imagine all of the jaguars and the capybaras and all of it are the different animals that you see. It's literally like being in an underwater forest. So that's why it's the Great African Sea Forest is how we call it. And kelp forests are quite widespread in that, yes, they're only found in temperate waters or coolish waters, but they're found in a third of the world's coastlines. And that's what's so surprising for us at Sea Change. And I think for a lot of people working in their own countries, and kelp forest is not as widely well known as coral reefs, for example. Most people will at least know when you say corals what you're talking about, but not everybody knows what you're talking about when you mention kelp. And they are the second most sort of vulnerable ecosystem in the ocean space to climate change. And many, many places in the world have already lost most of their kelp forests, even before we actually understand how these ecosystems work. So yeah, so that's the kelp forest.
Thank you. That's really helpful context. I do have a question here from the audience asking if you could share an example of a project that Sea Change has supported recently that demonstrates a commitment to meaningful social impact, and how was that project selected?
Oh, okay. So it's essentially, so what we do at Sea Change is we do a very specific kind of outreach. So our organization, we're essentially storytellers for ocean conservation. So one of the things that we do is our way of storytelling is to try and inspire a larger body of people, if you will, through social media or films like My Octopus Teacher, or even the film that's just come out on Netflix since yesterday, which is the pangolin film, Kulu's Journey. Although that's not anything to do with the ocean specifically, it still talks to the human connection with animals and why it's important to have these animals, like pangolins, for example, for it to be protected, what that means for an ecosystem, what it means in terms of rewilding this animal. So So that's our one big part of it. We tell these stories, and also these short films that you're seeing, or the books that have been written by Craig, and these short films that you can see it in the book in a QR code, and many of it that comes out in social media. But that's one side of it. The other part of it is Craig runs a tracking program every Friday where he actually tracks on the beach in the coast. He sort of trained with the San people in the Kalahari, and he's translated that knowledge into how to do coastal tracking and underwater tracking. And he takes a group of people with him, and they practice every Friday. And then he works with other groups in South Africa who are interested in coming and learning this kind of marine and coastal tracking. So we get different groups coming to spend time and to kind of immerse in nature and do this kind of tracking. And we also work a lot with science and marine biology students who are interested in the kind of work we do. So we do a science project called the 1001 Sea Forest Species Project, where we are now gathering data and information and identifying 1001 species in the kelp forests. And that's like a big science program. And so there are a lot of science and marine biology students interested in that. We also work with the Towards IPOS Foundation, which is the International Panel on Ocean Sustainability. And they work with the EU on policy, global policy for ocean conservation. And we help from the storytelling point of view for them to get their messages across to groups in order to change policy. So I hope that's answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much. And in fact, in our program, we actually had students in one of our courses read Amphibious Soul this semester. And students really enjoyed that book and kept their own tracking journal throughout the semester. So our program coordinator, Charlie, has a question, but I'm going to skip over your question, Charlie, quickly to address a question by one of our panelists from yesterday, Dr. Brian Kalia, who lives in the Pacific. And Dr. Kalia says deep sea mining is a largely unknown threat to most Pacifica peoples. Have you encountered the perils of deep sea mining in your storytelling?
So yes, in the sense that we are in South Africa, as yet, it's not on our doorstep like it is in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, which is in the Pacific Ocean, where they've already given out exploratory licenses for the deep sea mining to happen. So in South Africa, that hasn't happened yet, but there are possibly foreign companies who would want to come in and do this, and we are did you just lose me for a second? I thought it froze.
Just for a second, yeah.
So yes, so South Africa specifically as yet hasn't gotten into deep sea mining, but we're very aware of it, because when you work in this ocean space, you realize that's one of the biggest threats that's out there. And I think a lot of people truly don't understand, because it's being sold under this umbrella of a complete greenwash about how it's absolutely necessary for our green energy revolution, because the batteries use rare metals, and they say that if you mine in the deep sea, you can get all of this, these polymetallic nodules is what they're looking for, which will enable them to power these batteries, and that's how we will have a green energy revolution and it's really a massive greenwash, because firstly, we don't know what we have in the deep sea. It's only now slowly that technology and exploration is allowing us to even see it, and we're seeing unbelievable amounts of life and biodiversity in the deep sea. That's number one. Number two, the polymetallic nodules, which they claim has no life, has nothing. It's just this thing that lies in the bottom of the seabed, and you can just go pick it up and then, suck it up in this big machine and then use it for the renewable energy. That's also utter nonsense, because many, many organisms live on the polymetallic nodules. And they've also just discovered that the polymetallic nodules themselves, 1,000 kilometers down in the abyssal zone, produce oxygen in the dark, and they don't even know how deep oxygen is being produced. And we don't even understand that. And it's so critical that we do. And then messing with the benthic layer of the ocean is like the worst idea. I mean, millennia of carbon, and so much has been sequestered and brought down in this and benthic layer of the ocean. We've already stripped our soil, for example, on Earth, through really bad farming practices and other things that we've done. Now, if we do that at the benthic layer, the level of recovery is not even possible. Like, it's not going to come back within 10 lifetimes. Deep sea corals, which have taken thousands of years to mature, that's not going to come back within 10 lifetimes. Animals that we haven't even discovered yet are going to die. And the other thing with this deep sea mining is, of course, it's all very well, and they'll show you these pretty pictures and these technological things with these ships sucking things out, and that's all very clean, but it doesn't work that way. The ocean is filled with currents. We know that there's subduction in these benthic layers. We know that what the sediment is going to travel miles and kill anything that it settles on. These animals aren't used to, in the deep sea, that much light and noise and everything else that will go on with this production. So it's a massive threat. Many countries have, sort of put a moratorium on it because they say we need to know more. And I think at no other time in the world, right now with everything that we're facing, that the precautionary principle needs to come into play. We really, really need to stop and think about what it is that we're going to do, because frankly, there isn't a single example in mining that they can give us that shows us that they've done something to a particular landscape and that it's recovered and that it's okay. There's no good mining practices. There's not a single example that they can give us. So I don't even know on what basis they can now claim that they can do this to the deep sea. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that detailed explanation. And I'll ask you your last question here, which is sort of leading to how you process what you just shared. So what is the role of community in your own renewal and transformation? And sort of following on from that, how does science inform your own creativity?
Yeah, so community is incredibly important, simply because, so science is incredibly important from a perspective of understanding the physical processes that we all live in. So we need to understand those physical processes, because if we don't understand those physical processes, we'll make mistakes and we probably will destruct, which we are even with knowing the science, things that are our life support system. So science is incredibly important in letting us know what is important, how things work, why it's important, what it means, et cetera, et cetera. So not taking anything away from science. But where it's gone, I would say, in the wrong direction is that for too many generations, we have denied experienced life as knowledge, as important as science. So we've done a generational epistemicide of indigenous knowledge. And indigenous knowledge is so incredibly important because that is lived knowledge. That is knowledge that has come directly from being one with the land. And it is a kind of experienced understanding of processes that may come through myth, may sound like legend, it may sound like a story, but if you unravel it, at the core of it is science. And also what has happened is a lot of scientific discovery has happened on the backs of these communities. People have gone to places and discovered things or understood things or found things or started working because someone in the local community or in the indigenous community has actually taken them there, has actually shown them the process, has actually said, yes, we know this happens and we can tell you how. And it's been systematically ignored, and only the person who has gone there has, gotten the name on a paper, or this has become the way science is done. So that's been an enormous, I actually think that that's really what has been one of the biggest setbacks to why we haven't succeeded in the way that we should have with conservation. The other enormous strength with community is, I think we tend, those of us who so-called educated and live these lives and work in conservation, I think we have a slight arrogance in thinking that a lot of local communities either don't care about the environment or don't know enough about the environment from our little ivory thrones and, little ivory castles that we live in, which is, I think, also been hugely problematic, because these are people who are living every day with the issues that are happening every day. It is a woman who's walking into a forest to collect a particular particular plant or forage who will know what climate change is doing in that moment to that place. It is the farmer who understands what climate change is doing to the crops. It is a artisanal and local fisherman who will know what is happening to a particular species of fish. And I think ignoring that, and having ignored it for so long in this very arrogant notion that I know more about the environment than they do, has been enormously problematic. So I think at Sea Change, one of the core constructs when we started this work was to constantly go back and refer and look and give credit to and work at being very, very conscious of the fact that we are standing on the shoulders of incredible local and indigenous communities who know and have done the work and are really concerned. And I think that realizing that as a young reporter, when I would go into the field and meet these extraordinary elders and people, that's where I learned how to be in nature and how to look at her and how to do the deep nature immersion and why that is important and how it informed all the work that I've done. So I think, yes, I think it's an incredible, and also we mustn't forget that policy is very, very important, and we can put policy in place and we can protect a place, but if we don't have community support and buy-in, if we don't have local indigenous buy-in, if we don't have that support, nothing that we do is going to succeed in the long term. And let's not forget that close to 80% of the world's biodiversity still lies in indigenous lands outside of what we have created as protected areas. So I think it's really, really time that we all sort of paid attention to what local communities and artisanal fishermen and indigenous communities, whoever lives with the land, with the ocean, has done so for generations, have to tell us.
Thank you so much, Swati. I really, really appreciate those comments, and I'm so grateful for them. And before we close out with you here today, I'd actually just like to welcome our next panelists and have them join you on screen, so you can just virtually greet one another, Dr. Anya Martin and Dr. Joanne Pierce and Dr. Megan Judge, who are also from South Africa, and some of whom do work with yourself and Sea Change amongst local communities.
Yeah, so yes. So Anya and Joanne and they all do incredible work with communities, with the coast, with reclaiming a lot of what I just got to mention, likely in my speech, is a lost heritage and a lost cultural thread. And they're doing extraordinary work in that space to talk about it, to reclaim it, to really, show us what that means. So yeah, no, they do incredible work, and it's wonderful that you're going to have a panel with all of them on it. Yeah.
Well, Swati, thank you so much. We're so grateful for your time and for the wonderful keynote that you put together. I think Charlie would also just like to say thank you and close off here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know we've been communicating, Swati, and I just want to say thank you so much. The immensity of having you here is a real gift that is not lost on us, to speak to our community, to our school. So I just want to say thank you, and for your work. I know it's inspiring generations of people moving forward that are doing incredible work. And yeah, I just, it means so much to have you here, and we're so grateful for your time. So I just wanted to make sure I had a chance to say thank you, and wish you the best in your work moving forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I'm sure this panel is going to be absolutely terrific because the people on it are so great. So yeah, thank you.